I didn't even know that service existed.
Yeah, they just started it. It's probably only been going for about 2 years. Okay, so when you talk, then we need to be quiet.
Okay. Today is Monday, June 6, 2016. I am speaking to Roy Taliaferro. He was born August 24th, 1922. He is a friend and a former resident of the street where my grandparents lived, on Ely Street in Hannibal, Missouri. We are interviewing him in connection with his service in the war and also about his life on Ely Street. And we'll begin with him telling me a little bit about his family, where you were raised, your parents, some background about your early life.
Well, we lived on Ely Street, of course, and Ely Street at that time had a lot of good people. The Brinks lived next door to us, and Leroy, he's called Sweetie, he was one of my best friends, and we played around. And up the street was Davy Williams, and Davy was awful poor. Him and his mom and them didn't have anything, and but when I was playing with Davy and it was time to eat dinner, his mom called us all in to eat. And then there was the farmers, Zane and Dale and Roy and Hazel. And this is one of the finest families. I remember one time when he took his check down to Dad's store and signed it, and Dad said, "I'll cash it for you." He said, "No, I buy groceries here all the time. Just deduct what I buy from it and tell me when I run out." And we had the Williamses on up the street. Their daughter was named Dorothy, and she went to California and was working as a stenographer, I guess you'd call it. Was it J.B. Hunt?
I don't remember.
Well, it was one of the big companies, and she used to call my wife and her were friends, and she used to call and tell us about what was going on. Mom and Dad both lived up into their 80s, and Dad was a particularly funny guy to me. I used to smoke, and because Dad smoked Lucky Strikes, that's what I smoked. And I was taking him over to visit my brother over at Savannah, Missouri, and I reached for my package and it was empty. And he said, I said, "Dad, you got your," at home he always smoked a pipe, but when he went visiting, it was always cigarettes. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm out." So he pulled up his pack and had one, and he said, "Son, I always thought if you can't afford them, you oughtn't to bum them."
Now, tell me a little bit about your mom and dad. Tell me about how their birth, when they came here, and their situation early on.
Let's see. Mom come over from Germany.
Her parents.
Who?
Her parents came from Germany.
Oh, her parents, that's right. Her parents all came from Germany. And they couldn't speak. They spoke German in the family. And my uncle and aunt and Aunt Marie and Uncle Billy, they couldn't speak English until they went to school because all they spoke in the home was German. Dad lived, I think, to be 84, didn't he?
86.
86. And Mom lived 7 years longer after him, didn't she?
I said it wrong. She was 86. He died at 83.
What was it?
He lived till 83. Mama lived till 86.
87?
86.
86. And they were good parents. Us kids had always had enough to eat, and Dad would take care of her, buying of her clothes and everything. And we got 15 cents a week for expenses. I mean, to spend as we wanted. And but a nickel would buy a big popcorn down there next to the Star Theater, and I could get in a show for a dime.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, originally there was 11 children, 9 boys and 2 girls. But Harry, he died when he was 3, wasn't it? And I never knew him. And Tom was 2 years older than me, and at Christmas break from school, he had his tonsils taken out in the doctor's office. But he was a bleeder, I don't know what you call that, and he started hemorrhaging, and they rushed him to the hospital. And Dad gave him blood. He laid down on one table and they laid on the other, and that's how they transferred the blood back in those days. And let's see, Dad died of a heart attack, didn't he?
Did Harry survive? Did Harry survive, your brother?
Tom did.
Tom.
Oh.
No. And Tom died about a week after they took him to the hospital and burned that.
Hacked his throat.
And but that broke open again about a week later, and he passed away. Helen and Henry took care of our family, of the younger kids. They was always doing something, giving us something, helping us with not only with lessons, but they would haul us places, take us out on drives on Sunday. He had a 4-door Ford. And back in those days, them cars weren't very big, but we'd all get in and drive around, and they was always protective of us, and I'll never forget that, because they grew up, they didn't have much either, but they was always glad to share with us younger ones. I loved them all.
Now, when did you join the service? How did you enlist, or were you drafted?
No, I became 20 years old in 1942, and I was drafted, and I went to down to St. Louis to take my
Entrance exam.
yeah, and they shipped me from St. Louis to Utah, and they gave me my overseas training there, and then they flew me to the West Coast, or we went by boxcar, but we got to the West Coast, and they shipped us to a Army base there for training, and then we were sent to the Aleutian Islands, but we had to make stops. The first one was Umnak, where I met the National Guard from Hannibal, and your dad and them was in that outfit. And then they shipped me to Adak, which was a big naval base, biggest in the chain. And then they shipped me to Amchitka. And while I was on Amchitka, the Canadians sent their troops down there for training because they thought they were still Japanese on Amchitka. So they invaded from one side of the island and we did the other, and all they done was meet up. The Japs had got out during a fog. And then they sent me to Shemya, which I spent the rest of my time in Illusions. And when the war ended in Europe, I had enough points that they shipped me to the 77th Fighter Squad, and I came home for 30 days. Got married in 1944. And my leave was to be up on right after Christmas, the 26th. And I told him, I said, well, I'm going to be AWOL. I'm not going home, or I'm not going back. But then I got a message from the Army saying they had extended my furlough till past the 1st of January. So, and that's when I went home.
Okay, and Ely Street, had it changed much in those years? Tell us about the store.
Oh, the little store that Dad run. At one time it was double the size, but things got hard during those times, the Depression, so he cut it down to about half size. And he had candy and some canned goods and no fresh meat, maybe lunch meat or something like that, but no fresh meat. And the kids would come in and buy these penny Tootsie Rolls and all kinds of candies, and all of that most of that was penny stuff. And I noticed here a while back that the same size Tootsie Rolls we used to give a penny for are now a dime. And but Dad always gave us, like I say, a little something to spend over the weekend. And I could go to the show, and I could get me a sack of popcorn. The show was a dime, the popcorn was 5 cents. So that's the way we lived.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have you trade places with Dorothy.
Okay, fine.
And let me take the mic off of you.
Okay.
I'll stop this for a second.
All right.